One of the things I think we've been talking about over the past couple of days has been what should be some of the priorities around the next stage of development around the Northern Powerhouse. I think one of the things that we talked about yesterday and again this morning, for those of you who were there, was the importance of trade investment strategies, inevitably, which are linked to some of the key distinctive strengths of parts of the powerhouse, of which, of course, Greater Manchester wants to be right at the heart. And one of the announcements that was made after the budget statement, which has now been confirmed, which is why we can talk about it a little bit, is an agreement which has been made by Richard, Joe Anderson, leader of Sheffield, leader of Leeds and Newcastle, with government about what they see as the next phase, the next priority around the stage development of the Northern Powerhouse narrative. That builds on the work that was done by independent consultants to look at the distinctive strengths of the Northern Powerhouse in terms of economic sectors. And what the announcement this afternoon actually does is identify where we think we ought to go next. Now, for those of you who were here earlier, and John's presentation around transport, it's absolutely clear that all of that is fundamental to the delivery of the Northern Powerhouse. If we haven't got any transport, then quite frankly, it doesn't exist either as a strategy or indeed as a concept. But there are other parts of the Northern Powerhouse narrative which do need prioritising, particularly around skills and employment, particularly about how we source those skills to drive those higher sector developments. I think there's also a strategy and work to do around what we mean by innovation and science, building on the distinctive strengths, certainly within Greater Manchester and other parts of the north of England. And one of the other priorities that we identified, and which is part of the agreed next phases of work, relates to the whole approach to foreign investment and trade and exports. And that's an area where all of us working with our colleagues at UKTI have got an enormous amount of work to do over the next few months. And I think that provides a very useful backcloth to the eminent panel which you have in front of you, who are going to be invited to debate with themselves and with people here about how they see the priorities around inward investment. And I'd now like to hand you over to Mike O'Connor.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks very much indeed, and welcome everyone. This is a new format for this year, so we're trialling it. The idea is to sort of have a bit of a conversation, follow the just a minute theme of Radio 4 without hesitation, deviation and repetition from the panel. We've got a live studio audience here, and we're live streaming back around the world, so that should be good fun. We've brought the rain with us from Manchester as well, which is exceptional. Off we go. So I'm going to just do some introductions. My name's Mike O'Connor. I'm Head of Infrastructure at Addleshaw Goddard. And then I'm going to introduce the panel. The panel are going to just talk for 2 minutes without repetition, hesitation, a little bit about what foreign direct investment means to them. And then we're going to have a bit of Q&A and also hopefully get some of you guys to fire some questions as well. And if you are a bit quiet, I might pick on people because I do know a few of you. So a few friends there to invite you for a comment, because we do have a roving microphone. So moving on my left, we've got Tim Heatley. Tim's the co-founder of Capital and Centric. In the last it started 5 years ago, and they've completed 750,000 square feet of development. They currently spend £1 million a week in regeneration activity. And some of their projects in Manchester include the 30 million conversion of Crusader Mills and the £200 million campus project opposite Piccadilly Place. Having completed 5 developments last year alone, their pipeline of projects in Manchester stands at 330 million. Now, I also know that Tim did a law degree, but he saw the light I believe. And
wasn't in the bio.
no, I know it wasn't. I'm just making that up now. I'm just ad-libbing. But he did see the light and decided to go into property development and create wealth rather than live off it. So welcome.
I didn't say that.
Yeah.
I didn't say that. Promise.
David Percival next along. David's travelled an awfully long way. He's come from Shanghai just to be here on planes, trains and automobiles. David joined Deloitte in 2012, leading a new team, the China International Development Group, which he devised and founded. And the team's based in China and the UK and focuses on developing strategic business relationships across all of Deloitte's service lines. David joined Deloitte from UK Diplomatic Service, UKTI, and between 2008 and 2012, David was head of UKTI's investment team across China. David's co-chair of the Manchester China Forum, and on the recent Manchester, well, it wasn't that recent, during last year, visit to Wuhan, which is a second-tier city in China, and which is teamed with Manchester. David was there on the group, and that's where I met you on a coach, I seem to remember. And then at the far end, Lynda Shillaw, who's Divisional CEO of Property at Manchester Airport Group. Lynda joined MAG as a Divisional Chief Exec Officer for Property in 2014 from Scottish Widows, where Lynda ran the real estate fund business. Lynda's had 20 years in the property industry, heading the Co-op Estates and Lloyds Banking Group estate lending business, as well as a property director at BT. So welcome to all of us, and Tim. Off you go.
Far away, Mike. What's the first question then?
Well, no, I think you're going to say a few words, aren't you, just about what FDI means to you?
Yeah, so I suppose from our perspective, it would be institutional investment into and a kind of a more of a partnership approach over a long period of time. Certainly, that's our experience of it over the past couple of years. So we've worked with mostly American and Canadian pension funds on the projects that we've been involved in that have brought around £250 million of investment to Manchester in some of the projects that we're working on at the moment. And so for us, it was interesting that I think I read in some of the notes from AG that the Middle East investment has reduced by about 60%, whereas the Far East this year has increased by 60%. But overall, the investment into the UK property market has been led by the US, and testament to the fact that that's where a lot of our investment has come from. So for us, it's working with those predominantly US organisations that understand our approach to property, want to take a little bit of a long-term view. From our experience, we are a hedge, if you like, against some of the more faster appreciating locations where there's arguably a bit more risk. So we've got to see ourselves in the context of what it is, and the reasons why the foreign countries are investing in us and in our city. And so far, it's clear that the US is starting to get caught up by the Far East as well. So.
Was it difficult for you to attract investment from North America?
No, I think that they're looking for high quality cities. They're looking for a stable political environment, both nationally and also locally. And they want to invest in things and asset classes that they understand. So you'll notice it's no surprise that the US really created the PRS drive. It wasn't necessarily investment from the Far East or the Middle East. It's more of a US product, so we sometimes refer to it from a European perspective, but actually the sophisticated models and the well-stabilized models are from the US, and I think that's where that asset class has really started to get driven by. And so that's why they've come over and to some extent want to shape what it is that they're investing in, whereas conversely, if you look at the Middle East, they'll tend to invest more in student accommodation and hotels and so on. So for us, we conceived of a scheme that had a lot of PRS in it, and we kind of, I suppose, focused on the US, and we were prepared to go and have the conversations with them if need be, get on a plane and go out and see them and explain to them about the UK and explain to them about the Northwest and Manchester and what the proposition is. And as soon as you go out there, they understand the dynamics. They know about Manchester, and they're very keen to invest. So for us, it wasn't easy, but it was relatively straightforward given the quantums of money that we're talking about, £250 million across 2 or 3 projects, a lot of money.
Considerable sum. Did you find that having to explain a bit of feedback? Did you find that you had to explain about Manchester, or was Manchester already on the global map there?
I think some of them, have been and they've done the tour. They've been around it and they understand the city and they understand the dynamics, and they like the fact that there's culture and that there's art, and some of them know where the key locations are. Others, it's a completely new thing, but they're very open to those conversations. They were keen to be part of the story. They know it's a success. They've seen that it's consistently been an improving location, and they're prepared to take a relatively long-term view. If you like, they're prepared to take a 5-year view, which works for us.
And are there any structures in the States which are different around PRS? I was talking to somebody here on Monday night who'd had some dialogue with colleagues in the States where he felt that they talked a bit about it and then they realised there were more differences than similarities. Have you found that?
Yeah, I agree. If you think about how in the States everything's a drive-to location, everything's fairly instantaneous, and everything's got to be low hassle, and they're big on service. And we're not entirely convinced necessarily that's what that's what people in Manchester want. They prefer perhaps a bit more of an organic process and a bit more of whether or not they want to live in one block and never leave it, and do all their washing and shopping and everything else is questionable. So, but that's the American model is very much, and they do a lot more PRS in suburban locations as well, whereas we often tend to talk about it just from a city centre location. So, for them, I think it's because it's a much more stable and matured asset class. It has got a lot more differences.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Tim. Thanks very much. I move on to David. David, from your roles, both at UKTI and now at Deloitte, and seeing things from Shanghai, what's your perspective on foreign direct investment into Manchester, particularly as you're Vice Chair of the China Forum?
Okay, well, I mean, FDI is pretty much everything I do. I mean, in terms of what we do, we're working with Chinese clients all across China, from state-owned enterprises, private companies, high net wealth, working with them on understanding their strategy, the drive of FDI, which is often different with a Chinese company than it would be with other companies around the world. So yeah, it's absolutely crucial, and I think the point is that they haven't got started yet. They're still infants at it. They're absolutely at the earliest stage, and I think there'll be lots of bumps in the roads for them. But I think where China will be in 15, 20 years will bear no comparison with where it is now. And so to help them on that road and make it the opportunity that it should be for Manchester and the UK in terms of our cities, our businesses, our education system, I think there's a huge opportunity there. So actually explaining the opportunity, getting away from a bit of the fear factor about some Chinese investment, which I face quite a lot, and educating our clients, which are usually the Chinese companies, to how to work in a different environment. Now, Manchester has developed a great message, and what Lynda did by having Xi Jinping stand at Manchester Airport has a very, very significant impact in how Manchester will be presented in China in the coming years. I think the Chinese had a very, very big bias towards London, and that's still there, but that's part of my job, is to educate them to the opportunity, actually, to explain to them that actually there's more to London, more to the UK than London, and actually to show that. And when you get past that, you can have a very interesting conversation, and I think the forum has been brilliant to do that, to actually help sort of explain the whole picture of what Manchester has to offer. So it's so FDI is pretty much all I do.
I wonder if it's worth you saying a few words just about the Manchester China Forum to people here, many of whom may not have come across it, what it's about and what it's trying to achieve.
Okay, so the Manchester China Forum was set up. It was launched by George Osborne about a few years ago. It's a private sector and public sector initiative. So Deloitte are on the board, companies like Peel Holdings, BT, and it's very much to drive two-way business between China and the UK. Working very closely with UKTI and very closely with the membership firms. So we've been keen to drive a lot of Chinese investment into property, real estate into Manchester. That's been a focus and that's worked very well. But I see the next area we'll be looking at is areas like building collaborations between Manchester business and Chinese business, building collaborations in education, building collaborations in the flow of business and tourism is key. And of course that's going to be greatly enhanced by direct flights opening up in June from Beijing and hopefully from Shanghai later in the year as well.
That seems like a really good opportunity to bring Lynda in. Lynda, from the airport's perspective, how do you view foreign direct investment? Is it important to the city region? And how do you see that the airport can help attract that sort of capital to our region?
Okay. I think David has really just touched on this. I look at FDI probably with two different hats on. One is as being part of an airport group. And actually in that guise, FDI is about, sort of making sure that we are continually opening new routes up to new destinations around the world. Those routes are not just for holiday passengers, they're for business, they're for trade, and actually generally when you open the routes up, you actually get economic growth and development on the back of it. So opening the routes up into China has been really, really important to us as a business. We started with Cathay flying directly to Hong Kong. We've got Hainan flying to Beijing, as David said, from June, and then hopefully later in the year we'll be flying into another major Chinese city. With that comes, the airport employs about 22,000 people on campus, and there are about 45,000 other jobs. So this is really about growth. This is about actually attracting airlines in. With them, you get growth around the airport, you start to get investment around the airport, and actually that sort of ripples out into the wider city region. And we continue relentlessly as a group to actually focus on bringing more and more, particularly long-haul destinations into our business. The second sort of hat I wear is property. So Airport City is the sort of major scheme that we've actually got at Manchester. It's an international scheme. We are very much an international business. We have an international group of partners actually working on delivering that scheme, investing their equity and actually sort of bringing development forward. So BCG have been quite instrumental as a partner coming in to invest, work alongside us, and they build up their development business as they work on Airport City and other schemes in the region. But actually they also help us massively when we go into China to support us in dialogues that we have with investors and with occupiers, and their connection and their network is actually invaluable to that process. And I think it's really sort of important, just touching on what David said, when we're out in China with BCG, we're looking for both occupiers, but we're also looking for investors to take the product that we create or to forward fund the product that we create. That's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of, you don't get it on the first trip. It's repeated trips. It's about building relationships up. It's about, sort of expanding your network. It's about actually sort of showing what can be done and can be achieved, which again is where BCG working alongside us are actually very important, because they'll be building their track record up and actually very much helping us to promote that dialogue. But I think in the context of the Northern Powerhouse, Manchester Airport and its growth and its ability to keep bringing routes in, to keep bringing investors in, is actually critical to actually underpinning the growth of the whole city region.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Do you think, David, perhaps coming back to you, is it necessary for the city region to be able to showcase and package schemes and projects so that when you're talking to potential investors in Shanghai and maybe Beijing, that it's easy to explain what the opportunities might be?
Yeah, there's only so many conversations I can have with Chinese companies about I'm being a very nice person and I come from Deloitte. So to have projects to talk about is absolutely vital. It massively enhances the prospects of them investing if they can see a specific project opportunity. I think you have to be careful about how you market it. The Chinese are investing overseas for different reasons. They're often not looking, and the return on investment is not their driver. If that was their driver, they would never leave China. But they're doing it for best practice that they can take back to China. They're doing it to invest in safer markets. They're doing it to engage with design, technology, brands around the world. So to understand their tactics and what's driving them, and then marketing your opportunity to that is probably a key to do it. And then you have to look at the difference between how a private company will act and how a state-owned company will act. And obviously I live and breathe China, but it's not just relevant to China as well. It's actually marketing a project and then developing a message that fits that client. I get my teams to write a sort of script on a project of how that client will want that project, and it varies pretty much with every client. So that's the key to how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
You,
as well,
sorry,
to
Lynda,
add to
please,
that, Michael, we never underestimate the importance actually of the support of the city in actually in the interactions that we have with potential investors and occupiers. Sort of the traction of the city behind your strategy, the city behind your scheme. Sometimes the city is actually a co-investor in the scheme, or in the case of Airport City, it's in the enterprise zone. That carries massive traction going to this long-term view, particularly in Asia, but actually also in the US. The comfort actually that we've got, sort of local government support and central government support for a lot of what we're doing, so within the northern regions, that is really, really important.
Going to pick up on that, really. Is there, does civic, the presence of civic leadership, good, strong civic leadership, governmental support enhance potential investment and the ability to meet civic leaders directly for investors and get a feel for things? Does that help? Is that a trait of a good economic region?
You've got to remember that these guys, they're 10, 15 hours away. So the first major point is critical mass and scale is really important to them. You can't take something to them and go, we've got something, it's 20 million quid, do you fancy it? Because they'll say, it's just not worth us understanding the whole thing. If for 20 million quid, it's our lawyers will spend that really getting their heads around your legal system. So, yeah.
I'll be happy to help them.
I'm sure you would. So, so as a result, you've got to have critical mass, and often with the bigger schemes, you need to have, that needs to be in partnerships with, that could be a joint venture with other private companies, or in some form or other, it has to involve, the public sector, because often, if you're doing the bigger schemes, it's going to involve some of their land or some of their assets, and it could be the city council, it could be TFGM, and so the partnership and having the ability, therefore, to demonstrate that partnership can work really well together, and that it's not going to get in the way, and actually everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet and going in the same direction is essential. Otherwise, they won't waste their time and come over for the conversation.
And did you have to go looking, or how did you find your investors? Were they over here looking for schemes, or were you able to showcase something?
Yeah, we showcased a scheme. So we started, started with a scheme, and the first thing that they look at is the scale there. Is there buy-in? Is it sufficiently de-risked? Has it got? So that's where the strategic regeneration frameworks really work well for Manchester. So it's kind of it's the first tick in the box for planning, and it helps get the foreign investors over the line. Where it's got the first bit of planning in place. So and then from that point, we started to speak to agents that are UK representatives of them, and then from that point, you've got to be prepared to go out and sit in their office in their city and understand their point of view and understand what their event horizon is, and then start to bring them back over from that point onwards.
I was going to ask you then next, from your first engagement with your investors to the point at which you signed the deal, how long?
It's probably perhaps about 6 months. So relatively quick. I think once they've made a decision, they're such big organisations. They've got billions under management, and so I think that they need to once they've made a decision, they tend to just crack on and focus on it. So the hard bit can sometimes be getting to that point of that decision, or if you like, there's always competition. That's great news in Manchester. There's lots of competition from the investors, and it's working out. They all have a different approach, and they all have a different time scale that they want to exit. And so it's just working out which of those multiple of investors you want to work with, and who feels like the right cultural fit and the right corporate. And that's important, especially for an organisation of our size. We're not big, so if you're doing a couple £100 million deal, you need to know that they're going to be standing side by side with you for the next 10 years. So so that's why the personality is and understanding the individuals, and them understanding us and Manchester's view of life and development and the leadership is essential.
Yeah, great. Is there an aspect where an effective region that promotes foreign direct investment is able to explain the sectors that it's interested in. Is that helpful?
Can I,
Yeah.
just not ignoring that question, but going back to the because I think there's from a Chinese point of view, the point about city-city relationships is so important that one of the reasons I got involved with the Manchester Forum was because I've worked with Midas at NWDA for a long time, 15 years, and they've always done it very well. Now, from a Chinese point of view, they will invest in cities where there's an MOU between the cities, where there's an MOU between the countries. But it's not just a piece of paper. The regulators will look for that, and that will then secure the bank. The banks will then be more relaxed and lend at a lower rate. So the fact that there's a real business reason where these city-to-city links actually drive Chinese investment. So that's really important to pick up on.
I don't think that point has been probably driven home enough. There was a lot of play and store placed on Manchester and Wuhan's links last year as the commission officer there. But to somebody like myself, what you just described could probably go over my head, and I wouldn't perhaps understand and appreciate the importance of that.
Chinese seek out government-related projects for exactly that reason. They know they'll get they know it's going to be safe. They know their regulators, and they have to go through 3 regulators are much more likely to approve it, and they know that the banks will lend at a lower rate. So there's the real reason to do. So the civic-to-civic stuff is vital. I think something like 95% of all sizable Chinese investments around the world have a government relations angle to it. So it's very important.
I think that's the other interesting point as well, is that they do. It's equity, this, so they do need debt, and a lot of them do want debt to make the IRR work for them. And the other interesting thing is that when you talk to them from the Middle East or Far East and US, is that whilst they've got debt from their own country that they're prepared to bring over, actually what they'd much rather do is work with existing UK or European debt because they understand the market straight away. So they want to make sure that that's there, don't they? And whilst they have got a willingness from their own indigenous banks, they tend not to want to bring it over because they think, no, it's enough hassle as it is trying to get you understanding it. So they want to work with the existing UK lenders.
I think, Mike, as well, we're talking about investors, but also occupiers, because that's the growth end of the story. And it holds true. The importance of the civic and government support to a lot of occupiers, if they're coming from outside of the UK into cities, it's the same. I mean, and I've worked with Manchester in particular, with a number of major occupiers who basically, sort of want to hear that message directly from the city and from the civic leadership. So it actually runs all the way through. The investors help us to bring the development forward in partnership, but actually, in the commercial end of the spectrum, we need the occupiers, and the occupiers are the people. They're the growth engine. They may start small and grow massive, or they may come in one foul swoop. But actually, they need to hear the similar messages.
I haven't forgotten my sector's question, but do we think it's important for the city region to have outreach offices in different parts of the world? Should we be having offices in Beijing or Shanghai or in certain states in North America to actively promote what we're doing? Would that be an investment, in your view, that's worth making?
I think yes, wherever possible. I mean, it doesn't need to be. It can be managed in different ways. But as long as you've got somebody representing Manchester around the world, it's very hard to always get the right person in the right room at the right time in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Wuhan, in Dubai. So having somebody who can jump when asked is very important. But it doesn't have to be a full-time Manchester person. It can be in China we've set up an envoy network of people that do other jobs but are very happy to promote Manchester when the opportunity arises. So I think if you can do it, brilliant. But there are clever ways to do it where it isn't such a resource impact.
I think as well, from a business community perspective, we need to be smarter and maybe more joined up about the promotion of the city end of what we do. So it's not just about promoting your scheme or your project, actually promoting the city region as part of that wider context, because there are 15 million people in this city region. We've got world-class universities, we've got a massive talent pool, and hopefully now, as a result of what happened in the budget this afternoon, the opportunity to really start to improve the connectivity and the speed of connectivity between those cities. So we as business leaders need to build that into our narrative when we're actually talking to investors and occupiers in other countries, because that is one of the things that they will look for. They're not going to come if they've not got access to skills, to talent, and actually they're also looking, if you look at the scale they're investing on in infrastructure in China, sort of they're looking for something actually sort of in the UK, albeit it may not be the same scale.
And just going back onto connectivity in the airport, what's the view from Manchester when it sees the debates that are taking place in London around a new runway at Heathrow? What's Manchester Airport's take on that?
Simply, we're focusing on running the airports that we own as well as we possibly can and making them as profitable and open the cities and areas that we support with those airports, open them up to as much of the world as we possibly can, because we see that really stimulates growth. We've always taken a stance on this, that actually the UK needs a competitive network of regional airports in order to thrive. You can't rebalance the UK or sort of bring growth into a region if you haven't actually got fundamentally a number of airports around the UK that support those regional economies. So we've been really clear, but very focused on making the ones that we've got do the job.
I think for me as well, just it's important that the North speaks with one voice around this, because I know from a rail lunch in London last week when Crossrail 2 was announced, the chief exec of Crossrail 1 explained why that had happened, and that was because he said London's organised, and that it was there was a veiled insult towards the North, that the North isn't coordinated and organised, so therefore can't achieve these things. But I think from our point of view, if it was a question of high speed 3 or a new runway at Heathrow, we'd be going high speed 3, wouldn't we?
One of the challenges with both aviation and surface infrastructure is the strategy needs to be joined up. You can't do the two in isolation. So that's sort of fundamentally point number one, wherever you're doing it in the UK. And I think point number two, I'm not entirely sure there's an either or in some of these debates. I think actually the fact is we need capacity. We need to speed up connectivity between cities, both north-south as well as east-west. And I think today, the announcement of, the release of some of that, the 300 million of sort of fund to start to look at the studies around, high speed 3 and actually Crossrail 2 is we should really welcome it. It's not an either or. This is actually, we have to do this to be successful as a nation and to keep growing and to keep attracting FDI actually.
What's the capacity availability at the airport at the moment? Yes.
So both Manchester and Stansted are around sort of 50% capacity. It varies at different times of the day, obviously. So we've got room to grow. We've announced a big investment in Manchester, so we'll be investing about £1 billion over the next decade to improve passenger facilities, about 60 different initiatives, more piers, more stands, so that we can actually sort of bring more airlines, more aircraft in. Stansted is growing really, really rapidly. I mean, it's had something like 16% compound annual growth rate over the last 3 years. So, sort of we're actually again seeing the numbers in Stansted. They've ticked well above 20 million. And we're looking at both Stansted and Manchester growing to about 1 million passengers a year, probably for the next sort of 5 to 10 years. So, so the surplus and spare capacity that we have is not going to be there forever.
Very good. Can I take us back to the sector question then? Is a city region best placed in being clear about the sectoral areas it thinks it excels in trying to sell itself to other parts of the world? David?
Lots of areas have developed real sector expertise that is globally well known, and it's quite hard to convince somebody to change that view. I think you need to, again, go back to my previous point about understanding your client that's coming in. A lot of the Chinese companies we work with, they're looking not to enter the UK market. They're looking to develop something that they can take back to China. So the ability to access the business community of Manchester is really important to them, or is going to be important to them, or the companies that set up at Manchester Airport, for instance. So to promote the skill sets of the local businesses, the SMEs, and how they can help the Chinese in areas like design, in areas like R&D is going to be really, really important. Having sort of big strap lines about sectors, nice, but I mean, I'm not sure it's as important as really being able to. I mean, one of the big issues about a Chinese company set up in the UK is knowing who their first 30 meetings are. Who they go and meet, who they actually go and meet to get whatever they want to do going. Who do they start talking to? The Manchester Chamber, what getting that network together. So if you've been sent from Beijing or Xi'an or somewhere to set up a business and employ locally, understanding how to do that is a challenge. And you know, we would say that, and Deloitte tried to help with that, but you know, it's also about getting the local business community engaged in that as well, because it's a great opportunity for them.
Great. Yeah. Lynda, did you have a comment on that? You were
Yeah, I think actually just maybe embellishing David's last point, you know, part of, because we've always seen Airport City as being an international product, a lot of the companies that occupy our existing London buildings around the airport are international companies, many of whom have been here for many years. We have actually seen a growth in those companies coming in, and the companies that are here have also grown. I think when we started to look at how we took Airport City to the international market, we were very conscious of some of these points that David's just raised. You know, how do I set a business up in the UK? How do I access, you know, sort of skills that I need? Where might I live? How do I get my kids into school? So we've actually designed, you probably will have seen this actually sort of last year, but you know, a product called Connect, working with Deloitte and Addleshaw and Eversheds actually, which has a ready-to-go website, both for businesses and also it's quite a unique product. So I don't think this exists anywhere else on any other website, or for individuals where they can start to look and explore, you know, sort of those questions that they have and actually find pointers for guidance, whether it's back into these firms or into UKTI or their local chamber. And we see that as being, you know, you can't do it all on the internet, but it's a really important medium. And we're looking to expand it actually to incorporate, you know, Manchester has a growth company. The growth company is actually, again, pretty unique in what it does and how it actually supports us bringing businesses and investors in. Can we expand it to actually put the growth company on there as well? So it actually starts to tie the whole thing up. End to end. So I echo very much what David said, but you really have to think about it, about how you engage locally in those markets, and you know, and how we develop some tools to do that.
just
Yeah, I think to answer your original question, I'd say, you know, some of the key things that we shout about as being Manchester really do help. So, you know, I was out for lunch with KK whilst I've been here from Rouser Group, who's invested in St Michael's, and he said, look, the main thing for us is that, you know, we're a public listed company, and when we could announce that we're doing something in Manchester and it involves some football players, names that people know, well, the investors like that. They get it, they understand it, and so it's useful to have a couple of things that you can wave a flag for. So graphene, footy, the arts, you know, music scene, life sciences. They're a nice kind of like signpost. And then from that point, then you've got to get into the detail. Because if you think about, you know, some of the cities in China that have, you know, that are 10 times the size of Manchester that we've never heard of, and you have to go and invest in them, it's kind of, you just need somewhere to start, really. And so that's what they're really useful for.
Yeah, great. What importance do you think the Premier's visit to Manchester will have, David? You know, do you think, because I'm not sure it was well telegraphed 6 months in advance. I think it was a pleasant surprise. Do you think that's
It was well telegraphed. It was a lot of very hard work for a lot of people, thousands of people, in fact. If you look at where Xi Jinping has gone around the world since he was premier, there's been a massive spike of FDI that's followed it, from South Africa, Russia, Kazakhstan, and so there's absolutely no reason that Manchester isn't well placed, if not as best placed as I've ever seen, to benefit from that visit. So from the airport city, from the local businesses, from the property opportunities, it is the key opportunity. You cannot underestimate the impact it has on Chinese business leaders to see. They will invest just because he's been there, but you have to give them something to invest in, and you still have to make it viable. So yeah, it's a great discussion, and it fantastically put Manchester on the map in China. But the direct flights coming afterwards now is just great. So yeah, no, it's very important.
I think that is quite a cultural difference, isn't it? I don't think British people would go and invest just because David Cameron turned up in Haiti or Dominican Republic. You know.
no.
I would like to volunteer to be an outpost in the Dominican Republic. Or can. I'll do can, yeah, whichever.
Very good. Right, I think it's probably time for a few questions from the floor. So we do have a roving microphone. If there aren't too many questions, I shall pick on people to say a few things. So I'm getting evil eyes from certain people as well. But any questions from the floor? Don't be shy. Otherwise, I will pick on you. I'm going to ask Rory then to say a few words on Manchester Connect. Lynda, you've said a few words, but just give us a few words.
Thanks, mate.
That's all right. I did tell you beforehand I might pick on you.
So it would be interesting. I mean, obviously, I know a bit about it, but some people in the audience might not be so familiar with it. And 3 of the panel have intimate knowledge of the Connect portal. It's just interesting from what all of you have been saying. To me, it feels like there's a couple of key opportunities for us to improve the relationship that Manchester has with foreign markets. So, Tim, you were talking about how the predominant level of investment comes from America because they understand our systems. So there's no kind of barrier to entry through lack of familiarity, whereas from China and things there may be that barrier to entry. But also, it does seem that we're still very much in a money as investment kind of relationship with other countries rather than a jobs and growth relationship, which would perhaps be more sustainable and more beneficial in the long term to the economic growth and critical mass and sustainability of the economy and GM. So the business Connect Business portal is really designed to identify the perceived barriers to entry that companies may think are there from jurisdictions that we have less of an established relationship with, and they're also very much employer focused. So, David, particularly coming from you in your in-market experience, how much do you think that would change someone's view, or will they still be making a yes, no to a UK decision first, and then Connect gives Manchester a competitive advantage after that, or do you think it's something bigger?
Well, I must admit, when I got started, I mean, a much cleverer team than I in Deloitte developed Connect. But I did get some of my team is all Chinese, 40 apart from myself, and I got some of them to sort of without Connect to try and do what Connect can do, and it's impossible to sit in China as a Chinese speaker and trying to find on the information to how to set up a business in anywhere in the UK, let alone in one city, and manage the whole business process, but also the personal process, because that's very important as well. The poor guy or the lucky guy who's getting sent the other side of the world. So to be able to do that in one location, it's as far as we could find out, it's completely unique, and we should promote it very hard, and I think it's a great advantage for Manchester, and I'm sure it will be. UKTI don't have that. I know it was part of their CSR agreement last year to do more of that. But as far as I know, there is nothing like it in the market. So the ability to actually answer the questions. Often an FDI decision is a chairman's decision, and he will appoint somebody and they will go off and put all the information together. Now, I hope he talks to Deloitte and that, but it doesn't always happen. And if they can't find the information, they go and do something else. And so to be able to find all that information in one place and go through the process is great, and I think it'll make a big difference.
Very good. Sir, over here.
Thanks. Is that on?
Yeah,
thanks very much, guys. That was a really good talk. Obviously, all investors very much return driven. So what sort of levels of return are the investors looking for? And also, what sort of parameters are they using to determine any hurdle rates that they may have?
It varies. So, and it's interesting the way that, so you can imagine, in the States, I was talking about the instant nature of everything. So, as you'd expect, they want it a little bit sooner than perhaps the Far East, who are a bit more used to having to put money into infrastructure and take a bit more of a longer-term view as to when they're going to get their returns back. And so as a result, that it's very much IRR driven. They are fundamentally, they are financial institutions, and that's the difficult thing I think with Connect as to how you get them to then start thinking about jobs and employment and growth. I think the comfort that they do take from that being part of the agenda is that that's a very sustainable way of investing, and therefore they almost I suppose, want the local delivery partner to look after that side of things. So they'll do the money bit, but they think, you need to look after the sustainability bit, and that's probably where they see our role as being. And so, because they've got different, different horizons on when they want their investment returns, it seems to have quite a big effect on the IRR. And initially, we saw it kind of tumble. It was when we started to talk to them, they were a lot of the institutions. Well, the UK guys were asking for 20%, and they thought that they'd come to Manchester and do a load of deals because, well, it's miles cheaper than London. We'll easily get 20% return IRR, no problem. And then, of course, they found out that that wasn't necessarily the case, and actually they struggled to get the quality of product that would drive that kind of return. And then they started to say, well, maybe we'd do it for a 15% IRR, perhaps. And then interestingly, when you start to talk to foreign investment, they'll take a bit more of a longer term view. So they ended up kind of down there towards a 10% IRR. And all of a sudden, then viability starts to return. And I think that's because they're probably not necessarily, as I said at the start, really, we're more of a hedge. They can get better growth elsewhere, but they see the UK and the northwest of Manchester as being a safe bet, and it doesn't have to be fantastically racy returns. They just know that it's liquid. They can get the returns back relatively quickly if they need them, and they aren't gonna lose money. So it's kind of capital protection, and so that's what we picked up on.
A view from China, just on that, so returns.
It really spectacularly varies. It's changed as well. A few years ago, we were talking to insurance companies, the sovereign wealth funds who were, doing trophy investments and a much smaller single digit they was expecting. And now they're getting a bit more confident, so they're going into looking at development, and they're beginning to look at sort of teams and so forth. So, pretty much I couldn't tell you a clear, this is what a Chinese investor is going to tell you, because it'll change pretty much in every meeting. But they are becoming more confident in the market, and there's a new wave behind them. There's a new education process coming. So I think there's, but back to a previous point I made, they haven't come out of China to make, 25, 30. They would do that in China, but they're over here for other reasons. Here being Manchester. It varies, but probably. Development in teams is kind of discussion we had. They've got to make it viable as well when they're probably going to borrow the money. So that's going to be in the UK now increasingly. So of course it's got to work, and their regulators got to see a good return as well. So it can't be just for other reasons. There needs to be a decent number.
So,
just picking up on that point, how much attention do you think you should pay to the competition? At CBRE this morning, we're talking about collectively German cities, more interesting in their survey than London for direct foreign investment.
I don't think you can ever ignore your competition. I mean, fools do. I think we've got a great brand as a city. There is huge interest in Manchester as a city. From all over the world, actually, from an investor perspective. We've got a great story to tell, and I think it's being embellished by the prospect of the further investment in major infrastructure, and I think we've just got to keep going out there and say this is where I think as business leaders with big projects within the city and businesses in the city, we need to have a collective narrative that is consistent and that actually sort of continues to smash it as to why you come to Manchester versus anywhere else. But I've always seen Manchester competes with every other major city in Europe, and don't ignore them, just go after them basically.
I was just going to pick up on something. I know you were at the International Hotel Conference, I think it was in Berlin last week. What was the interest in the Northwest like there for hotels, and is there an interest from investors? And do we have a need for hotels in the Northwest?
So it's yes to all of the questions. We do have a need for hotels, particularly in Manchester. I'm going to go a bit more Manchester-centric because it's my home turf on this. The city is underbedded. For a city of its size. The airport, as I said, is growing at 1 million passengers a year. Airport City will bring forward about 10 new hotels through its life cycle, about 2,600-700 new beds. And some of the early phases actually will be doing a couple of new hotels. The investor interest was really high, and it wasn't just from Asia. It was from the US, it was from the Middle East. And actually, all of the major brands, because they now tend to have a portfolio of brands within the sort of main brand stable, are all looking for, you know, sort of opportunities in Manchester. We had an incredibly productive 2 days, and there was not a negative in it, actually. So,
do we have one last question? I think it's probably time to draw things to a conclusion. Okay. Yeah, please.
One last point on the competition question. Is the flip side of that as well. The other thing we need to consider is, of course, so we know what cities are currently investing in Manchester, and then I think at the same time we need to be conscious of the fact that that will evolve and change over the next 10, 15 years. And so really what we should be doing, and perhaps from an outpost perspective, is actually going and pioneering and innovating and going into the new cities where they've got wealth creation occurring. They're not yet in wealth preservation mode, but they're in wealth creation mode, and we should be probably starting to target those now, so that when they do move into preservation mode and they are a net exporter of wealth and looking to invest, then that we should be there for them.
Well, jolly good. Thank you very much. I think to conclude, I think my take on it is that the conditions are right in Manchester for inward investment. We've got the Chancellor doing a great selling job for us around the world. He is actually a local MP. We've got great civic leadership. We're first in many areas, the combined authority. We're always pushing the boundaries on things like that. We've got the Northern Powerhouse as a badge. We've got Jim O'Neill helping us promote it. We've got a range of overseas investors, you guys from North America. We've got Chinese, we've got Rosalie from Singapore, and we've had for some time Abu Dhabi United and their investment in Man City, which is now extended to a range of regeneration projects and housing projects in the north of the city. So I think we've got plenty to be buoyant about, and I go back from here feeling quite pleased that we should be looking forward to 5 to 7 years of greater economic growth. So, on that note, I'm going to draw things to a conclusion. I'd like you to show your appreciation to the panel in the usual way, and many thanks to them. Thank you.